good. All right, so Numbers 24, and notice verse 1 here. It says, and when Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, he went not as at other times to seek for enchantments, but he set his face toward the wilderness. And Balaam lifted up his eyes, and he saw Israel abiding in his tents, according to their tribes, and the Spirit of God came upon him. And he took up his parable and said, Balaam, the son of Beor, hath said, and the man whose eyes are open hath said, he hath said, which heard the words of God, which saw the vision of the Almighty, falling into a trance, but having his eyes open. How goodly are thy tents, O Jacob, and thy tabernacles, O Israel. As the valleys are they spread forth, as gardens by the riverside, as the trees of lean aloes, which the Lord hath planted, and as cedar trees beside the waters. He shall pour the water out of his buckets, and his seed shall be in many waters, and his king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. God brought him forth out of Egypt. He hath as it were the strength of an unicorn. He shall eat up the nations, his enemies, and shall break their bones and pierce them through with his arrows. He couched, he lay down as a lion, and as a great lion. Who shall stir him up? Blessed is he that blesseth thee, and cursed is he that curseth thee. So when you look at that, this is what God gave him. Beautiful language about Israel. Again, it doesn't appear that Balaam knew the children of Israel prior to this time. He obviously is having this encounter with God. God told him, you're not going to curse these people. In fact, you're going to bless them. Notice what Balak does here in verse 10. Now he hears this, okay? And Balak's anger, now he's the king of the Moabites, if you remember, and Balak's anger was kindled against Balaam, and he smote his hands together, and Balak said unto Balaam, I called thee to curse mine enemies, and behold, thou hast altogether blessed them these 3 times. Therefore now flee thou to thy place. I thought to promote thee unto great honor, but lo, the Lord hath kept thee back from honor. Let's read that again. I notice here's how the world thinks, by the way, today and always, okay? So the king gets mad. He hears this blessing that God gives to Balaam. And here's what he says to Balaam. Therefore now flee thou to thy place. In other words, you get out of here. So there's kind of a threat there. I thought to promote thee unto great honor, but lo, the Lord hath kept thee back from honor. When anybody says something like that, then you know they're way off, and you can just count on it's God's honor that you want, certainly not the world's. But there you have it. Now look at verse 12. And Balaam said unto Balak, spake I not also to thy messengers, which thou sentest unto me, saying, if Balak would give me his house full of silver and gold, I cannot go beyond the commandment of the Lord to do either good or bad of mine own mind, but what the Lord saith, that will I speak. And now, behold, I go unto my people. Come therefore, and I will advertise thee what this people shall do to thy people in the latter days. Now here's going to be another message from God, and he said, here's what's going to happen to your people and the neighboring nations around Moab here. And he took up his parable and said, Balaam the son of Beor hath said, and the man whose eyes are open hath said, he hath said, which heard the words of God and knew the knowledge of the Most High, which saw the vision of the Almighty, falling into a trance, but having his eyes open. I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. And that's a prophecy about Jesus himself. So Balaam literally is given a prophecy concerning Jesus. And shall smite the corners of Moab and destroy all the children of Sheth. And Edom shall be a possession. Seir also shall be a possession for his enemies. And Israel shall do valiantly. Out of Jacob shall come he that shall have dominion, and shall destroy him that remaineth of the city. And when he looked on Amalek, he took up his parable, and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his latter end shall be that he perish forever. And he looked on the Kenites, and took up his parable, and said, Strong is thy dwelling place, and thou puttest thy nest in a rock. Nevertheless, the Kenites shall be wasted, until Asshur shall carry thee away captive. And he took up his parable, and said, Alas, who shall live when God doeth this? And ships shall come from the coast of Chidom, and shall afflict Asshur, and shall afflict Eber, and he also shall perish forever. And Balaam rose up and went and returned to his place, and Balak also went his way. Now, if we didn't read any further and the story ended there, all of us could almost say, now Balak shouldn't have went, but he did. And out of all those three encounters where Balak said, let's build an altar, and the altar was built, and then Balaam goes off and prays, comes back and says, I can't curse these people, God's going to bless them. Balak gets mad there, he goes another time, and then this third time. Then, of course, there's these two parables, these two messages from God that basically, the last one is basically says, you know what, these people, along with God, they're going to destroy you. And that's the way it is, and the story ends with Balaam leaving and going home, and Balak stays where he's at. You'd think, well, Balaam's not that bad a guy. But here's where we have to trust God and know that God knew exactly what he's doing when he put this in the Bible, and also the effect. And you would think, what could be the effect of a preacher, a prophet here, having an encounter with a king? What difference would that make, even though it sounds like I can't but speak the things that God said? Well, we're going to find out here. Notice chapter 25, verse 1. Here is the result. And Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. Now, Balak's the king of the Moabites. So here you have God's people intermingling with the Moabites, and it creates some very big problems. Notice verse 2. And they called the people into the sacrifices of their gods. So the Moabites are saying, hey, come over here and help us sacrifice to our gods. And the people did eat and bowed down to their gods. And that's the people of God here, okay? And Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And we'll read just a couple more verses after this. You just see the great judgment of God. It says, and the Lord said unto Moses, take all the heads of the people. Now, when it says that, notice he's saying literally the head here, okay? Take all the heads of the people and hang them up before the Lord against the sun, or in the sun, that the fierce anger of the Lord may be turned away from Israel. And Moses said unto the judges of Israel, slay ye every one his men that were joined unto Baal Peor. Now we're going to stop there because it goes into some intense things here, because the Moabites, along with the Midianites, which is basically a twin group of people to the Moabites, they're committing literally all this, not only spiritual adultery, but it's just massive things going on between these people, all right? So that's important to note here, all right? Let's see here. All right, so let's go to Numbers 31. We're going to skip all these other things. Some of these things are just simply kind of chronological things. There's different things that's not related to this at all. But when you get to chapter 31, here's where we're going to pick up as it pertains to Balaam, okay? Still at this point you may say, yeah, but Balaam, how responsible is Balaam? Well, we're going to find out here how responsible Balaam was for all that mess there. All right, so notice verses, all right, let's go ahead and read down to verse 8. It says, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, avenge the children of Israel of the Midianites. Afterwards shalt thou be gathered into thy people. So this is one of the big major military campaigns that Moses will perform, and then he's getting ready to turn the reins over to Joshua. It says, and Moses spake unto the people, saying, arm some of yourselves unto the war, and let them go against the Midianites and avenge the Lord of Midian. Of every tribe 1,000. Throughout all the tribes of Israel shall ye ascend to the war. So there were delivered out of the thousands of Israel 1,000 of every tribe, 12,000 armed for war. And Moses sent them to the war, 1,000 of every tribe, them and Phinehas the son of Eleazar the priest, to the war with with the holy instruments and the trumpets to blow in his hand. And they warred against the Midianites as the Lord commanded Moses, and they slew all the males. And notice verse 8. And they slew the kings of Midian, beside the rest of them that were slain, namely Evi and Rechem and Zur and Hur and Reba, 5 kings of Midian. Now notice this, Balaam also the son of Beor, they slew with the sword. Now, then it gets, there's this utter slaughter that God mandates here. So when people say, well, you know this, God's a God of judgment. In this case, God says there's going to be utter destruction of all these people. They begin with the males, and if you read the rest of that, I'm not afraid to read. It's just that, it's just the judgment of God. Now notice verse 16, and this actually tells us why at the very beginning of the story of Balaam that we talked about last week, why it is significant, why God has done what he just did, and why it was so important way back then that Balaam should have listened. All right, so notice verse number 16. It says, "Behold, these caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to commit trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor, and there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord." And then it goes on to talk about there's going to be more executions that goes on. But I want to go back to that verse 16, that phrase, through the counsel of Balaam. Now, here's what's significant about this, and of course it's right here in the Bible, but you look at that and you may say, what was the counsel of Balaam? In other words, what did Balaam do beyond what we know he did? Now here's what we do know. Balaam basically had a conversation almost exclusively with one man, and it was the king. You've got Balaam, and he's speaking to the king. Certainly there was some people around Balak the king, obviously some of that entourage he sent that Balaam would have talked to. But as far as I know, and the Bible never records anything where Balaam gets up and makes some kind of a big announcement either to the Moabites, and certainly it doesn't look like he said anything to the Israelites. It doesn't even look like he ever even had any contact with any of them. There's no discussion that Moses and Balaam came together where Moses and Balaam says, well, you know, you're a prophet of the Lord and I'm Moses, and there was nothing like that. So the question here is then, how in the world did the Moabites and the children of Israel come to the point where there was all this intermingling, all this idolatry, and then God immediately commands this massive slaughter that went on for all these people? Balaam himself is killed. Now, if God wanted to spare Balaam, he certainly would have been spared, but in the listing of those kings, it also lists right after the last one, those 5 kings of Midian, and Balaam was also killed by the sword. Now, when you think about what we read over there in chapter 25, it sounds like to me that Balaam says, well, I told you, Balak, I could only tell you what God told me to tell you. And that sounds noble, doesn't it? But let's go back to the beginning of the story where these men first showed up, and God says, you tell them no, and that's it. And then Balaam kept playing along. Balaam kept playing along till finally he had all these encounters, and it sounds like to me that the counsel of Balaam sounds like to me that somehow, because Balaam represented God, and certainly he didn't represent the Israelites, because it doesn't sound like to me that he even knew who they were. But finally, eventually he knew who they were, because in those parables that he told, he talked about coming out of Egypt. He talked about all of that, and even spoke about the prophecy of Jesus. So I guess the point is, how did Balaam pay such a heavy price and have this put on him that he was really the reason why all this destruction was going on? I'll tell you why. The Bible says the counsel. Sometimes you don't have to say anything. Sometimes it's just who you associate with. Balaam basically just associated himself with Balak the Moabites, and it sounds like to me somehow the people says, well, if Balaam is with them, then it must be okay. Now I hope you understand what's going on here. Balaam didn't get up and promote the Moabites, but I tell you what, he hung around them. But it sounds like to me that Balaam was going, well, you know, guys, I can't tell you anything beyond God. Then why didn't he go home? Why didn't he go home when the donkey said, you know what, I'm literally going to collapse underneath it because that angel right there is going to kill you and me? Why did Balaam, after all of that, say, he said, am I supposed to go home? And what did the angel say? Just go on. You know why? That wasn't the approval. That was the angel saying, you go ahead and do what you want to do then. Balaam wanted to be with these people. Balaam said what he said, and by the way, we don't know really what he ended up getting from old Balak. He may have got a whole bunch of riches, but I know this. Prior to this, you would think, well, Balaam wasn't such a bad dude, wasn't such a bad man. Yeah, he was. You know why? Because look at all the carnage that he created just by simply hanging around the wrong people, and God's people somehow from that, because the Bible says the counsel of Balaam. Now, if Balaam went over and visited the people of God, and said, you know what, the Moabites, they're not so bad. The Bible doesn't record it, but let's just say he did. Maybe he says, you know what, here's what they wanted to do, but I'm here to tell you, God told me I can't curse you. You are God's people, and that's great. How in the world then did Balaam's counsel cause all of this? And the only thing I can tell you is, knowing from this story and what God tells us about how we're supposed to treat people that are unbelievers, and especially when I call ecclesiastical separation, which means I have a responsibility to this church and to God, the gospel ministry and the doctrines of God, to not hang around people that don't believe like we believe. Now here's what could happen. I could say, well, I like hanging around them. They're nice to me. There's a lot of nice people. But God said you should have stayed home and you should have not went with these people, period. That's it. And Balaam played around till he lost his own life, and the thousands of people that died because, look, it's probably the Moabites or the Midianites, at least up to this point, would not have been slaughtered had they not intermingled with God's people. And God says, I'm going to slaughter the ones that have intermingled with them, and I'm going to slaughter the ones that's the Moabites. The thousands of people that died simply because, as the Bible says, through the counsel of Balaam. Sometimes counsel doesn't mean you have to say anything. I don't believe Balaam probably went to anybody and says, let me counsel you about some things. No, I believe it was the lifestyle that he had. Just the association, even though we look at him as him saying, now by the way, the Holy Spirit gives us this. This is not me reading into it or changing anything. All I can tell you is it looked like Balaam was talking the right stuff. But he was bringing destruction to the people of God, to himself, and certainly to the enemies here. So that last little statement I have down here, again, we see the catastrophic results of one person's decision. Let me remind you, the Moabites are a people that go back 1,350 years. No, let me make sure. No, that's the wrong timetable. I'm confusing a timetable I had in Jeremiah. The Moabites continued on until Jeremiah's day, in which the whole nation was destroyed. Now, we're talking about a lot of time past. We're talking about David and Solomon and all these kings, until eventually God said in the book of Jeremiah that I'm going to destroy a group of people. And one of those was the Moabites, and the other was the Ammonites. Both of those groups of people are the result of two daughters of a man by the name of Lot. And if you were here, you already know this. But just in case you're not, when they left Sodom and Gomorrah, 4 people, Lot's wife was turned to a pillar of salt, and then there's Lot and 2 daughters, okay? They go up into the mountains, and they're spared from all the destruction. But those 2 daughters said, we're going to have a relationship with our dad, me one night and you the other night. And they both produced children. One of them was Moab, the other was a boy by the name of Ben-Ami, and the Bible tells us he became the Ammonites, and the other became the Moabites. Now, as I said in my devotion, that child is not responsible for what mama did and what daddy did. It's sad when children come into this world and things have been done, and sadly that child grows up and has to take the abuse of people because mom and or dad lived a sinful lifestyle, and that poor child has to bear that. Now let me tell you something. Moab grew up, and you can imagine the conversation. Who's your daddy? Well, his name is Lot. Well, I thought he's your granddaddy. He is. He's your daddy too? Yeah. Now imagine what that would be like. Well, who's your brother? Well, my brother, it's the same situation. Now, you know what? Those 2 boys individually did not have to go down a path like mama did and all of that. But you know what? For some reason, those people stuck together and they kept making the wrong decisions till one day there's a king over them by the name of Balak, and he says, we're these people, and these people over here are our enemies. Well, isn't it sad that the Israelites and the kinship, you know that Abraham and Lot, Lot was the nephew to Abraham. So we're not talking about real distant nations. We're talking about, relatives basically. And how sad in this situation, these Moabites are a people that don't live right, and then these people carry right on into Jeremiah's day. And how sad people decide to keep making the wrong decisions. Well, that's because of influence. Moab and Ben-Ammi both could have said, you know what, this is a bad situation. My mother, she made the most terrible mistake, and Lot, my daddy and granddaddy at the same time. How sad, but I'm not going to follow this lifestyle. I'm going to go over and I'm going to follow Abraham's kin. And he could have done that, but he didn't. Now, there's a lot of pressure when mom and dad and all your relatives live a certain way. But I admire people that no matter what, if it's right to do, they just do it, even if they've got to say goodbye to their whole lineage. But they're going to do right, bless God. But there's some people don't have enough courage to do that, to say, you know what, I have to do it because mom and dad did it, grandpa did it, I got to be the same way, or else what? Always do right. So there's a situation. Go right on back to Israel today pays for the price of Abraham having a relationship with Hagar. To this day, that's what all the conflict is about. There's Isaac and there's Ishmael. Both of them's daddy is Abraham. But Ishmael says, you know what, I'm going to be the promised seed. And God says, no, you're not. It's going to be Abraham and Sarah and Isaac right on through that line. That's where Christ will come, and that's the promised seed. But guess what? Ishmael said, hey, I don't think so. And that's why to this day, the people of Ishmael are enemies to the people of Isaac or Israel. All them neighboring countries, those Arabs, all of that, that's a fact. There's no doubt about it, because they say, we're the promised seed. And guess what? They get their ammunition because they say, because Abraham's our daddy. And you know what? They're right. But God said, wait a minute, that should have never happened. One decision by one woman who went to her husband and says, you know what, I don't actually believe God's going to give me a child, after God promised that he would. So you're going to have a relationship with our handmaid. And Abraham agreed to it, let his wife talk him into something very horrible. And then the day comes when Ishmael's born, and 12, 13 years later, Isaac would be born. And all that because of one decision. And that's again what we're seeing here with Balaam. Balaam could have said, you get away from here. My God told me you're bad people, now leave me alone. And Balaam would have been a hero. Balaam would have went down as one of the guys that stood for God. But he goes down as someone that has one of the worst reputations of all the Bible. And you'll find out as we finish this up next week what the Bible says all the way in the book of Revelation about old Balaam and his effects. So tonight, you say, man, that's just heavy stuff. I know. And yet there's no such thing as a little decision. No such thing. Mom and dads do it all the time. Kids pay for it. Kids do it all the time. They pay for it. But let's end on a high note here. But thank God for all the people who make the right decision. And people get to benefit from the right decision for generations. You know, in the Bible, as I close with this, God said there's people that make bad decisions, and people pay for that to the third and fourth generation. Now think about that. Think about if I committed a sin and God says for 3 or 4 generations, the effect of what you've done is going to go to your children, to your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren. But I'm so glad that I know people who's made the right decision, and the kids benefit, the grandkids benefit, the great-grandchildren benefit, and right on down if people will just do right. So influence is a big deal. But for Balaam to act like, well, all I can do is just tell you what God wanted me to tell you. Yeah, you say that, and you said it 3 different times. You should have listened to God the first time when he says, do not go with these people. And then his own donkey, the only place in the Bible that I know that an animal talked to a person. And the donkey says, you should listen to me, because the angel is about to kill you. And the angel says, if this donkey had not bailed out from underneath you, I would have killed both of you. And then what does old Balaam say? Should I go home? You say, how could anybody do that? Well, people do stuff like that all the time. So let's listen to God. And, God said, I said it, that's it. And sadly, old Balaam paid the price. And so did thousands of people, thousands did. So we're going to stop with this. Choir, come on up. We'll go through our song real quick. I appreciate you coming tonight. Mr. Joyce, thanks for coming. And we'll just rejoice.